which I imported last time. And it's just timestamping it like so in the file name. And as you'll see in a minute here, I'm also looking at the last write date in the file system. Is going to come in handy too. But the timestamp is really just so that if I need to hit this multiple times for testing purposes, it's going to create a new file name each time. It's going to dump this into a CSV exports folder, which I can show you here. For a File Explorer, we've got in the web, CSV exports. Here's the two files we created last time. Just, I can open these up in Excel if you want to see them, but there's the contents I exported last time. It's going to be different this time because that database got blown away and restarted with Docker, but of course in reality it's going to be relatively static. Okay, so that's how far I got last time. So what I worked on in the meantime is the other end of this. Normally this would be in two separate programs, right? But this program here is not what I'm trying to teach. This is just a tool to help me build a tutorial for all this integration stuff. But the import part of it. So I created another service called Loyalty CSV Import Service. You can see it lives over here in the core project. And we'll get to this bucket stuff in a second. Just kind of ignore that for now. But this is the method that I kind of skeletoned out a little bit. Put a lot of to-dos in there. This class, as it is right now, might be doing too much. One of the ways I like to judge that, just by glancing, is if a function takes up more than one screen. And I know there's a lot of to-dos in here, but this function is taking up just about the entire screen. The other thing, you're describing the class, you're describing the function, if you have to use the word and, it's probably also doing too much. So this imports from CSV and it reads the CSV and it inserts into Couchbase. So I use the word and, it's probably doing too much. But for now, we're going to leave it this way. We can always refactor it later. Just keep that in mind. Okay, so here is the method. The first thing you need to do is find the newest CSV file in that target folder, if there is one. So I created a method called getNewestCSVPath. So it's actually going to find the path of the CSV file. So let's just go examine that. What I'm using here is the system. What's the namespace for this one? System, I think it's system.io. System.io has this directory info, so you can give it a directory and get information about stuff in that directory. For instance, I want to get all the files that are star.csv. And then I can use a couple link methods to say, well, order that whole list by descending order, the last write time. So the newest file first, the newest CSV file first, and give me the first one. First or default. So if there are no CSV files, first or default is going to return a null object. And so right here I'm saying return CSV files. That should be CSV file, I think. That's singular. CSV file, because I have the first or default. So if the CSV file is there, it's going to return that. This question mark basically is a null check. It's going to return the full name of the folder, which is a string, or it's going to return null. All right. And just a little note here, I may want to add some logging to this. When you're doing these kinds of operations, when you're moving data around, expect them to break. Expect these things to go wrong. And it's really good to have some logging in place so you know where exactly it went wrong. Oh, it broke on this record because who knows what. But with logging, we can see, okay, exactly where it broke so we can more easily diagnose it. I haven't added any logging framework to this project yet. I'm going to leave that to do there for now. Okay, so when this program returns, it's going to have a string. It's going to either be a string with some path or it's going to be a null. If it's null, just bail out. And again, I may want to log that, but I may assume that this method is doing the logging. Not quite sure about that yet. But anyway, it's just going to bail out if it can't find a file. Otherwise, if we keep going, we're going to get null reference exceptions and that kind of stuff. Okay. The next thing we need to do is we only ever want to import CSV files one time. And so what I could do is I could either delete the files as they come in, or I can just save that information somewhere that, hey, I finished importing this file, so if that's still the newest file, don't import it again. So I have a little method here to check to make sure that this file is newer than the last one that I imported. There's lots of ways to do that, but right now this is just doing nothing. It's returning true because we're in testing. But what I would probably do in this place is I'm going to store that record somewhere to say this data was imported and just keep a running log somewhere of that. So I haven't done that yet. And if it's not newer, so if it's not a new CSV file, we're just going to bail out. And again, maybe log it. All right, so at this point now, we actually have a CSV file, and we actually want to import that data into Couchbase. So I'm going to open it with the stream reader here and CSV reader. So I just sort of copied and pasted this part from the CSV reader documentation. And then you can say csv.getRecords. This will return all records from the CSV. It'll put each row of that CSV into whatever type I specify. Now, I could create a C# class here and define what fields I expect to be imported. However, if that CSV structure changes, if the names of those fields change, let me show you a CSV. Let's show you here in Notepad what it looks like. This is the CSV that's generated from Postgres. So it's ID, password, first name, last name, points. I could put all those into a C# class, and then CSV our CSV helper would know to put the number 2 into the ID field, put this password into the password field, etc. However, going forward, keep in mind I'm putting this data into a NoSQL database that does not have a schema. Postgres does, Couchbase does not. So if somewhere down the road, Postgres adds more fields to this table, I may or may not care about them in Couchbase, but I may want to just import them anyway. So if they added another field like, I don't know, foo, and this has a foo field on it, XYZ, etc., right? And maybe it's optional, I don't know, 1, 2, 3, 4. When I import the CSV, if I use a predefined C# class, it's going to basically ignore this foo field because I didn't tell C# about a foo field. It only knows about these. However, if I use dynamic here, which is a C# type to represent objects dynamically, C# is not a dynamic language, but it has a type called dynamic, then whatever records come in there will be imported into this records variable, this records list right here. This is going to be a enumerable of dynamic objects. Okay. So going forward, this means that I don't have to come back here and change my program if Postgres decides to add more columns, if my member loyalty system adds more columns. And which is totally fine. If there's more columns being added, I probably want to bring those into Couchbase. And Couchbase, I don't need to tell it at all about new columns. It's just going to store it as JSON, as you'll see here in a second. Okay. So at this point, I'm going to grab all the records from the CSV. Now, I'm a little concerned about this line. I'm using a small set of test data, maybe a dozen or so records. In a production system, this could be 1 million records. It could be hundreds of thousands of records. I'm concerned about, is this going to load everything from a CSV into memory? Or is it going to be some sort of stream? It's a stream reader. Is this going to give me like it's an IEnumerable? Is that going to be like a just-in-time sort of reading the CSV file? Or is it going to load it onto memory? And this goes back to why you should use logging in your program, because if I try to use this in production and 1 million records just fills up RAM on whatever machine this is running, it's going to have an out-of-memory exception, and that's going to be a problem. So I'm concerned about this. There are other ways to use CSV. CSV dot, I don't know. You can do like a loop of them. I think it's a CSV reader, so you could do like a CSV dot read or a can read, so you can loop through it and do one record at a time. Again, I don't know the details of CSV helper if it's going to be smart about memory or not, but let's just assume it is for now. And that's why I'm using dynamic there, so I'm going to cut that part out. All right, the next thing we're going to do, and I want to talk about pool size here. Let's do that down here, I think. Yeah. So I'm going to create a new list of documents. Now this iDocument, this is the first time I'm actually using something from the Couchbase SDK. Couchbase is a document database. So let me show it to you over here. I have a staging bucket. It's kind of like a database, or the term database in relational. It's a bucket. It's a collection of documents. So if you hear that noise in the background, it's they're working on some remodeling here. But so Matt's document, each document has a key, and each document contains some JSON. So this is fundamentally different than a relational database in that I don't have to specify the different columns and different fields that I want in here. So I could just add another one. No changing of schema or anything like that. It's just storing JSON. All right. So I need to take those CSV records. Each row from the CSV is going to correspond to one document here in Couchbase. So to do that in .NET, I'll create this a list of iDocuments, because I'm going to be importing a bunch of them. Loop through all the records from CSV. And then for each record I find in CSV, I want to create a new document in Couchbase. And again, I'm using dynamic type here. I'm not specifying a C# class. I could, but I'm going to lose some flexibility there. In some situations, you don't want all those new fields to be picked up, and that's totally fine. For my purposes, dynamic is going to be just fine. I'm specifying a key for each new record that's being created. I'm just going to give it loyalty -member whatever the ID was of the record coming in. The content itself, this is any object you want to specify. It's got to match this type you specified up here, but any object, and that will be serialized to JSON by the .NET SDK, the Couchbase.NET SDK. It's going to serialize that to JSON. So any object there. And then this part, I'm not sure, but I'm not sure if I want to do this or not, but in Couchbase, you can also specify an expiration time for your documents, also known as a TTL, or a time to live, and say, you're basically telling Couchbase, here's a document, I want you to hold on to this document, but after a certain period of time, get rid of that document. I want it gone. I only want this document to exist temporarily. And since we're importing data into a staging bucket, my thought was, well, this data should not live in staging indefinitely. So let's give it an expiration time. And I gave it an expiration time of 90 seconds. And I may shorten that down to demonstrate this. But this is in milliseconds. And I'm not really sure if I need a TTL just yet, but I thought I'd leave it in there. You don't have to specify a TTL. You can tell Couchbase, by default, it's going to have an expiration of 0, which means it's not going to expire. It's going to stay in there indefinitely. Okay, so I'm creating this document. I'm adding the document to this list. So at this point, I'm not actually talking to Couchbase yet. I'm just creating this huge list of documents that I want to put into Couchbase. This next part is where I'm actually going to interact with Couchbase. And I think I neglected to cover this at the beginning, but this method is asynchronous. And this is why. Because there's asynchronous methods in Couchbase. One of them is insert async. And I can give insert async an entire collection of documents and say, just as a batch, here's 1,000 documents, insert them for me, please. And it's asynchronous because behind the scenes, I believe, I have to dig into the code to know for sure, but I believe this just loops through those documents and makes individual asynchronous calls of each of those documents. I've got a little ping over here. Just making sure. Someone's chatting me. Anyway, so it's going to loop through those and individually insert them asynchronously. So this has to be asynchronous, and the method calling it has to be asynchronous. And by the way, back here, this method for the REST API also has to be asynchronous. So it's got to be asynchronous all the way down. Okay. All right, and then, so once these are inserted, we're just going to wait for that. I also wanted to mention pool size and muxing in a second here, but at the end, I want to say track that. So we've gotten to this point with no errors, track it, so store the file name somewhere, maybe the current date time, or maybe both, and say, so next time we do this process again, I can check to make sure that I'm not inserting duplicate data. Not that it would really hurt, but it's just kind of pointless. And another approach, of course, would be, I think I mentioned this already, just delete the CSV file after we're done. That's another approach as well. I'm assuming, though, that maybe we want to keep a record of all the CSV files. You could also, again, if you're doing this in the command line, you could script this so that it could back them up, or it could compress them, or keep track of them, or whatever you wanted to do. But we'll do some sort of tracking there. Okay. So right now, this should work. Let me go ahead and open up the website here. And so I've added this. We're going to create some loyalty data first. So right now, there's no data in there at all. Just completely empty. So we'll go ahead and try this out. We're going to add a bunch of data. Hopefully it works. Yep, still works. Add a bunch of data to it. So I refresh this. Bam, we got a bunch of data in there. Great. Okay, so just imagine the customers are doing things that earn them points. We can update some of them as well. Give them some more points. So if I refresh this, you'll see, look at the points column here. It's changing. Customers getting more points. All right, so at this point, I'm going to produce the CSV, and that should also still work. Over here, CSV exports, I'll just sort this by latest. So I've got a new CSV file that corresponds to the data I just created. There it is. And next thing, we're going to try our consume CSV. So this is going to look for the latest CSV file, read all of that, and put it into Couchbase. And so right now here in Couchbase, we can see our staging bucket has no documents in it. Try it out, execute, success, retrieve, there's a document. So that CSV file was consumed and put into Couchbase. And you can see I've got all the data here. It's in JSON form instead of CSV. Instead of a table, it's in JSON form. So we've gone a full tour of data. We've gone from a normal table to a CSV version of the table to JSON version of that data. So this data is getting around. Yeah. All right. So there we go. So that's it. That's the CSV portion of it here. So this is the nightly CSV we're talking about. So the nightly part is what's next. This is a job that should run. It should create a CSV file every night, and it should consume one shortly after that every night. Lots of ways to schedule that. Again, if you're going in the command line route, you can set up cron jobs and things like that to run these export and import commands on a scheduled basis and do all kinds of checking and logging. You do bash scripting, PowerShell scripts, all that kind of stuff. Totally possible. Totally fine to do it that way. I'm just doing it all in C# here. There's some pros and cons, different approaches. All right. I guess I didn't really talk about the bucket stuff. Let's come back to that a little bit. This is going to be important going forward as well. So this loyalty CSV import service is expecting something called a bucket provider. And from the bucket provider, this is how I get an actual bucket object that I can interact with in Couchbase. The bucket object is what I use to read and write records from Couchbase. I'm saying, give me the staging bucket. So if I go back over here to my startup, I've added this new service here, this Couchbase service. And that all comes from a dependency I added called Couchbase Extensions Dependency Injection. So that is an open source library on GitHub, also in NuGet, that allows you to just do this, services.add Couchbase to a .NET Core program. Now, inside of this, I could pull this from a configuration file, just like I did up here. I'm hard coding all this information into C#. Also, probably not a good idea to do that. You want to be able to change the config without recompiling the program. But again, we're keeping it simple here. And so I specify, with Couchbase, you specify servers, right? So Couchbase is meant to be clustered. There are multiple machines running in a sort of a cluster that all communicate with each other. So what you can do is you can specify each URL of that cluster individually, which is a good idea. Or you can just specify one of them. Either way you do it, Couchbase is going to, the .NET tool here is going to be able to find all of those servers, either way. It's just the more you specify here, the better, because if one of them goes down, it'll fall back to the next one and go on from there. Now, I only have the one node running. In fact, if I bring up this Couchbase console, if we go to servers, there's only the one here running. I'm not running, it's a cluster technically, but it's a cluster with just a single node. So if I want to scale out for bigger deployments, I'd add more nodes here. I can split up the services between the nodes, etc. But this is all just local to my machine, so it's just one single node. I'm specifying credentials here. Really, really poor choice of credentials. Do not use administrator as your login. Do not use password as your password. Those are very easy to guess. Don't use those. Use something more secure. And connection pool is what I wanted to talk about. By default, the Couchbase .NET SDK, and this is where it gets a little above my league in terms of how this works. But there's a connection pool of the network connections that go from your application here over to the Couchbase cluster. And I think by default, the maximum size of that is 2. So there's going to be 2 total connections. Now, connections to Couchbase are different than connections to like a relational database just because of the way Couchbase works. However, because I'm doing this CSV import process, which could be thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions of records, I want to increase this pool size a little bit higher. So there's more connections I can work with to more efficiently handle all that traffic. So I'm bumping it up to a max size of 10. And so I don't know what the theoretical ceiling is for that. I would say at some point it's going to be, you're going to run into the physics problem of, my network can only handle so much electricity, right? So that number may vary. I'm not saying 10 is the best. I'm not saying it should be higher or lower, but I'm just pointing out you can change, you can tweak and tune this connection pool size. All right, everything else here is the same. So when I do this services.add Couchbase thing, then what that's doing is it's adding the iBucket provider to the dependency injection container. So I can then use that to get a bucket. Now behind the scenes, there is a cluster object, which you don't have to interact with in this case at all, but the cluster object, which is more like the DB connection, like what we saw with Postgres and MySQL. And so this is just going to handle the details of that for you. I mean, that cluster object should be something that's not disposed of on a regular basis. It should just be kept alive as a singleton like I'm doing up here. But all those details are being handled by this add Couchbase. Okay, so we're in good shape here. Yeah, we're in good shape. So that's all the progress I've made so far since the last stream. What I want to do now is, a comment from Coral. It's likely a matter of available connections on the servers and how much overhead you're incurring managing all those connections versus how much you actually have to push through them. Yes, absolutely. And this is something we could probably dive into and get really deep on, go down a rabbit hole. But mainly I just wanted to point out that it's something you can and should think about changing for an application like this. But the default setting is usually pretty good for a normal web application. But I'm creating this crazy CSV import thing, and so I wanted to bump up the number of connections a little higher. All right. Good. So the next thing I want to do is, let's go ahead and add Hangfire to this. So Hangfire. Let's talk about Hangfire a little bit. Hangfire.io is currently down. Oh, there we go. So Hangfire.io is it's a really interesting tool to do background processing in .NET and .NET Core. And I've done background processing in the past. One thing that really appeals to me about this is that you don't need a separate process. It's not required. It's possible, and you may want to do that eventually, but you don't have to have a separate process to start firing off background tasks. So there's lots of different types that you can do, like a fire and forget, recurring, which is what I'm going to do today, delayed jobs. With the Pro version, you need batches and things like that. But all I really need right now is this recurring jobs here. It's also going to give us this very cool dashboard just automatically. So if I can get this to work, it's going to be very, very cool. And now what I've actually got here is a blog post that I wrote back in December about using Hangfire with ASP.NET. And this is one of the things that I think I've said this before. One of the reasons I blog is so that I remember how to do this stuff, and I keep a sort of a breadcrumb trail for myself. Although, you know, I've always been bothered by that breadcrumb analogy, because if you remember the story of Hansel and Gretel, they put down breadcrumbs so they can find their way back out, but it doesn't work, right? The birds come and eat the breadcrumbs, so they can't find their way back out. So it's like we're using this metaphor, but the metaphor is sort of the opposite of what we're trying to do. Anyway, that's a weird tangent. Background job. So you need to do three things with Hangfire. Hangfire, it requires I believe it requires, I'm not 100% sure of that, but I'm going to use anyway, persistence. So I need to tell ASP.NET about Hangfire, just like I did with Couchbase. I need to add it as a service. I need to tell it which database to use. I think by default it goes to SQL Server. There's a lot of plugins for other databases. I'm going to use Couchbase, of course. And then start firing out jobs. So let's start by adding Hangfire. And the way I do that, I didn't put it in here, did I? So anyway, the way I do it is here. I'm just going to go to NuGet, and I'm going to browse for Hangfire. Now I could just install plain old Hangfire here, but I'm going to skip a step actually. There should be a Hangfire Couchbase NuGet library, which will install Hangfire core as well. Core says, I prefer the second brain metaphor. Leaves mine free if I'm offloading stuff into separate notes or documents, as opposed to the breadcrumbs. Yeah, second brain. I like that. If I only had a second brain. All right, so I'm just going to install Hangfire Couchbase. That's going to do both, as you'll see here. It's going to update. It's going to install Hangfire core and Hangfire Couchbase together. So I'm killing two birds here. I've not practiced this, so this is all brand new stuff right now. Let's just see if I can get it to work or if it breaks everything. Okay. So back here, configure services. Did I close my, yeah, here it is. I'm just going to copy and paste this. That's how I roll. Copy and paste. Services. Add Hangfire. Why isn't it finding add Hangfire? Doesn't seem to like that. Services add Hangfire. I'll see why that wouldn't work. Did I add it to the right project? Dependencies, NuGet. Yeah, Hangfire's right there, which includes Hangfire. Oh, you know what? I think there's another project I need to add. So that adds Hangfire and Couchbase, but it doesn't add the actual .NET Core stuff, I don't think. Hangfire. ASP. You know what? I'm just going to go here, back to my blog post, and I'm going to put this all on GitHub for myself as well, somewhere. I thought I did. You know what? I didn't. But I know I have some elsewhere on my computer. So I use this personally for a project I use for categorizing and cataloging family photos. It has some jobs that run in the background. So let me just have a quick look at that. I'll open up this one in Visual Studio. That'll be easy. Yeah, 2 viewers today. Kind of slow. I think I'm competing with a couple other streamers that I follow, so that's totally cool. We can just chill. All right. So best pictures. I think it's in dependencies, right? I'm actually a minor contributor to the Hangfire Couchbase project, so I have the raw project in there. But let me see if there's another library I'm forgetting, like for those extensions installed. Hangfire. Looks like it's just Hangfire. Am I forgetting something? Hangfire core. Do I need? I need to install Hangfire core by itself as well. That would be strange. It's worth a shot. I figured just installing Hangfire alone would do that. Hangfire, and there's Hangfire core. So I'm a little confused about that, but we'll go ahead and install it anyway. Hangfire core. Why isn't this showing up? What am I doing wrong here? Using Hangfire. It's not happy with me. We just, did it change or something recently? Well, when in doubt, go and visit the documentation. Getting started. Yeah, so this is by default. It uses SQL Server extensions, I think, are built in. Installation Hangfire core, which I did that. Hangfire SQL Server. I'm not using SQL Server, but I should. That shouldn't matter at this point. This isn't. Here we go. ASP.NET Core applications. That's what I want. Hangfire ASP.NET Core. Aha! I thought there was something like that. There we go. How did I miss a 1.9 million download library? Okay, there we go. Using Couchbase storage engine, this configuration part here. I'll just, I believe that is expecting client configuration, which is, we'll get to that in a second. Client configuration. So let's paste that in there. And then I have to give it a bucket. So I'm going to call it, we're going to customer 360 Hangfire. This is the Couchbase bucket that is going to be storing all the information that Hangfire needs to store in order to perform these background processes, retry them, scale them, etc. So I need to go ahead and create a bucket called that. I could use a staging bucket, but I really want this stuff to be isolated in its own bucket. Just need a small one, does not need to be huge, so I'll go with a minimum. And then what I probably would do in practice is to create another user that just has access, just the necessary access, like a read and write access to that bucket. I'm just going to keep it easy though and stick to administrator. And that's what this client configuration part is here for. So the Hangfire service, as far as I know, does not go off of does not interact with the dependency injection framework, so I have to sort of do this manually. And so it's going to be kind of what I did up there, very similar. So it's going to have connections of its own, but it's the same server, same username. Whoops, what am I doing wrong here? Oh, it's client configuration, sorry. So I just need to tell the servers, and that's the client configuration.authenticate, set authenticator to, this is going to be a new password authenticator, administrator, and password. So this is creating a configuration, and this is saying how to authenticate that connection. And then I'm passing all of that into Hangfire here as client configuration. This use Couchbase storage extension method, which also needs the bucket name specified there. All right. So that is the first step. Where did I put my? Did I close it down? My own blog post here. Hangfire. There it is. Okay. And then, yeah, the second part, this is pretty common pattern in ASP.NET, is to go down to configure and say, yeah, we're going to use the Hangfire server. That's really it. So Hangfire is now officially set up as far as our application is concerned. Here's the configuration stuff I talked about. Now, what I need to do is actually start kicking off some jobs. To do that, and I can do it here in the, is it configure services? Is that where I don't actually say. But this is as good a place as any. At the end here, I'm just going to kick off a job. And so I'm going to call this nightly CSV export job. And what you do is when you want to create a recurring job, so recurring job.add or update, give it a name. I give it some expression to actually run. And then I also give it a cron expression. So there's some built-in expressions here. You can create these fluently. Also, you can just give it a regular old cron expression. So if you know cron, if you can understand, I don't understand that cron stuff at all. You can just use the built-in ones. So I can say daily at I don't know, probably like the first hour of the day, like 2 a.m. maybe. So 2 hour and 0 minutes. And we got to put something into this method, right? Let's see, body company or regression tree. Oh, I think it's like this. How did I do that over here? Yeah, okay. So I just need to say something like method call here that's going to be run nightly, if I can type it correctly, run nightly CSV export. Okay, and I can just create a method to do that right here. And all that's going to do is it's going to do the same thing that my controller was doing. It's going to have to run this one. Now, I don't have this export service, so the way I can do that is, well, there's a couple different ways. Let's see. I know I can get, is it services dot get, or maybe it's down here. Again, I'm going to have to look at my own project in the past because I can't remember for the life of me how I did this. Okay, I'm just opening the notepad. Couchbase storage authenticator. Okay, I'll actually do the recurring jobs down here in configure. And yes, this is all coming back to me now. So I can actually pass in these the services and repos as methods in configure. Okay. Yes. So I'm doing this wrong. This needs to go out from here. Whoops. From here down to here. Can't even operate copy and paste. Okay. And I'm just going to put this in a little section. Recurring jobs. I only expect to have 2 of these for the whole application, so just putting them here is fine. All right. So what I'm going to use is loyalty CSV is just loyalty CSV export service. So I'll just add that here. Do some method injection. export service. And really all I need to do is just change this to export CSV. And there we go. So I've just, with basically 3 lines of code, I've said right here, well, it's more than 3, but you get the idea. Here's how to connect to Couchbase. Hey, Hangfire, use that to connect to this Couchbase bucket and use that to store information you need to keep running jobs on a regular basis. And then, oh, we can get rid of this part. And then down here I said, hey, ASP.NET, use Hangfire. And finally, hey, Hangfire, here's a recurring job I want you to run every day at 2 in the morning. Execute this code right here. And that's it. Now, one other thing I need to add, this is not necessary, but it's very cool, is we're going to use the Hangfire dashboard. So I'll put that right up here. And I'm going to, just keep this simple here. I think that's all I need. Yep. And in fact, that may even be the default value. Yeah, so I don't even need that. I'm just saying I'll leave that in there for just being explicit. Saying create me a Hangfire dashboard so I can see all the processes that are running, if they've succeeded. I can kick them off manually, and so on. All right, so let's compile. Make sure everything compiles, and we'll go ahead and try it. So I'm going to be kicked off. The site's still going to go to Swagger page first. Hopefully it'll load up here in a second. It's sure taking a while. This may be because it's creating this Hangfire stuff for the first time. I don't see any documents in there yet, but there we go. So over here in another window, I'm going to bring up the Hangfire dashboard. Look at this. All this stuff comes out of the box with Hangfire. Here's my recurring jobs. Here's the one I created, nightly CSV export. So I can actually go ahead and fire it off right now if I want to. Or I could delete that. And I can see that here's the servers that I've got connected to Hangfire right now. So as I add more servers, if I wanted to scale out Hangfire, they'd all be listed here. So this is the name of my computer, actually, Crate Dragon. So it's just one computer that it's found and connected to this so far. And I could add more computers to my home network or whatever, connect them to the same Hangfire database, and they would be able to take over the same work. All right, so then recurring job. This isn't going to run. It's not going to run for another 8 hours. Does that seem right? It's 2:30 my local time right now. 8 hours would be 10:30 p.m. So I don't know what time zone this is on. But anyway, that's fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my folder here where my CSV files are. Customer 360, examples, and there's this CSV exports folder. So I'm going to remove all these. No CSV files in there right now. Okay? And now I'm going to just manually kick off this task. And hopefully, if it doesn't break, we can go over here and see that, hey, this job is running. It's queued anyway. It should start running. Now, if it doesn't bomb out, look at that. CSV file shows up. So that job completed, succeeded, and I can drill into that and even see more detail about it. So this is all the stuff that Hangfire is doing for me. It knows how to create this code. There's the state of it, how long it took. All this kind of stuff is there. I can requeue it, so it'll automatically retry a certain number of times, but eventually it'll say, okay, enough, this won't work. I can come back in here and requeue it automatically. And this job will actually be cleaned up out of the database, and according here by default, a day. If I go back to my Couchbase, this is all the stuff that Hangfire has created by itself to keep track of everything that's going on. I don't need to worry about this data. This is all just stuff that Hangfire is working with. But for instance, I could see that I've got this recurring job document. We got some stats about a job that succeeded. Some more succeeded stuff. All kinds of data in here that Hangfire is using to execute these jobs, keep track of them, and also to keep this nice dashboard running. And you can see it keeps a history of stuff in this graph. You know, how many jobs succeeded, how many failed. This is real time as jobs come in. Right now, nothing's happening. It's not going to happen until, and again, we can see 8 hours is going to be executed next, or 7 hours. I wonder what. That's weird. It says 10 p.m. I don't know what's going on with the time zones there, but anyway, all this stuff comes out of the box with Hangfire. Great. It's great stuff. So right now I've got exporting the CSV file every day at that time. So the next thing I'm going to do is create another recurring job. Add or update, and this is going to be, I call this one nightly CSV export. It's going to be nightly CSV import. And it's going to also use another service, which I'll just go ahead and add right here. Loyalty CSV import service. And again, normally these would not be in the same process. What would be the point of that in reality? But we're doing a tutorial here. And we're going to import CSV. And I'm going to say cron.daily. And now I'm going to have it like at hour 2, but well, let's do hour 3 just to be safe. We'll let it sit there in that folder for a whole hour before I kick off the job to import it. That gives this job enough time to get through potentially large set of records and write them to disk. Of course, this is one of the dangers of this method of moving data around. You're sort of depending on the file system and depending on the program creating the CSV to create it, have it be there, have it be correct, and then you have to go and fetch it. As opposed to the Kafka system we created before, which is more of a smooth system of moving data in real time. But, you know, sometimes you have to do a CSV import like this. That's totally fine. And I'll just say minute 0 just to be explicit there. What do you guys think of this? This is a resharper feature right here where it actually kind of, I'm pointing to the screen like that's going to make a difference. We're doing control through. Nope, that's not it. Where it actually kind of shows you the name of the parameter. This is not something Visual Studio does, I don't think. This is something that ReSharper adds to be more explicit about the parameters you're adding. At first, I wasn't sure I liked it, as it just makes the code look longer. But I don't know, it kind of helps me to read what's going on a little better. All right, so I'll compile that. Let me go back into Couchbase here. I'm going to, in my staging buckets, all those documents expired because I set a TTL on them, if you remember. So they're all gone now. I didn't delete those explicitly. Those just disappeared. And go back to here, and we'll go to Hangfire again. And we see we have 2 recurring jobs now. This one, the export runs in 7 hours. The import runs in 8 hours, which makes sense to me. Now, I already ran this one manually, so we've got the CSV file out there. And it has 14 records in it. I want those records to be in Couchbase. There's 0 records in there right now. I'm just go ahead and trigger this manually. So it's going to run that job, and there we go. Records are in Couchbase.